The silver moonlight cascaded through the towering crystal windows of the royal palace, casting an ethereal glow across Queen Hyarin's private training arena. Her movements were poetry in motion as she faced her latest challenger, a warrior from the distant Centauri system who had boasted of his unmatched strength. The gathered nobles watched in silent awe as their queen, her silver skin shimmering with exertion, moved with deadly precision. The challenger, despite his impressive build and reputation, found himself overwhelmed within moments. His strikes met empty air, while Hyarin's counterattacks landed with devastating accuracy. "Yield," she commanded, her foot planted firmly on his chest, her practiced blade at his throat. The warrior's pride crumbled as he tapped the metallic floor 3 times, the universal signal of surrender. Rising gracefully, Hyarin turned to address the assembled court. "Does anyone else wish to test their worth today?" Her luminescent eyes swept across the gathered crowd, but no one stepped forward. This had become a familiar scene in the past 5 years of her reign. Later that evening, as she stood in her private chambers overlooking the sprawling capital city of Starborn Prime, her closest advisor Yuna entered with quiet footsteps. "My queen, that makes the 40th challenger this year alone." Hyarin didn't turn from the window. And like all the others, he was found wanting. The Council of Elders grows increasingly concerned. Yuna said, her voice gentle but firm. "Our laws are clear. A queen must choose a mate by her 30th cycle. You have only 2 cycles remaining." "Laws can be changed," Hyarin responded, finally turning to face her advisor. Her silver hair, braided in the traditional warrior style, caught the light of the setting sun. "I will not bind myself to someone weaker just to satisfy tradition." Yuna sighed, a sound she only allowed herself in private with her queen. "It's not just about tradition. The people need stability. They need to know the line of succession is secure." Hyarin's fingers traced the battle scars on her ceremonial armor, each mark a testament to her prowess. "How can I lead our people if I compromise on our most fundamental beliefs? A queen's mate must be her equal in combat. That is not just law. It is wisdom passed down through generations." A soft chime interrupted their conversation. Mina, the chief of protocol, entered with a data crystal in hand. "Your Majesty, we've received word from the Galactic Council. Earth has officially requested to establish diplomatic relations." Humans. Hyarin's interest was piqued. She had heard stories of this species, physically weaker than the Starborn, but remarkably adaptable. What makes them think they're ready for formal relations with our empire? Mina projected a holographic display showing various human achievements. "They've developed some interesting technologies, Your Majesty. Their combat styles, in particular, have caught the attention of our military advisors. They've learned to overcome stronger opponents through something they call martial arts." Hyarin watched the displayed combat footage with growing interest. The humans moved differently from any species she had encountered, using their opponent's strength against them rather than trying to overpower them directly. "Schedule their diplomatic delegation for next month," she decided. "It's time we saw these humans for ourselves." That night, as she performed her evening training routine, Hyarin found her thoughts returning to the human combat footage. For the first time in years, she felt a spark of genuine curiosity. Perhaps these humans would bring something new to her court. If not a worthy mate, then at least some fresh perspectives on combat. The following days brought a flurry of activity to the palace. Preparation for the human delegation meant updating security protocols, arranging suitable accommodations for their different environmental needs, and briefing the court on human customs and etiquette. During a morning council session, Lord Kian, one of her more vocal critics, raised his concerns. "Your Majesty, surely you don't intend to give these humans the same status as our traditional allies. They're barely more than primitives." Hyarin fixed him with a stern gaze. "Judge not by appearance or preconception, Lord Kian. Our own history teaches us that strength comes in many forms." As she dismissed the council, Hyarin returned to her private training grounds. She had ordered the combat simulations to be updated with human fighting styles. Hours passed as she studied their movements, their strategies, their ways of turning disadvantages into advantages. Fascinating, she murmured to herself, analyzing a particular technique. They don't try to break the mountain. They find a path around it. The next morning, as Do-yun prepared for his presentation at court, a message arrived from General Sora. The Queen requests that you wear whatever you would normally wear for combat training. Do-yun read the message twice, then smiled slightly. So the Queen wanted to test him herself. He had expected this, though perhaps not quite so soon. Instead of his formal diplomatic attire, he dressed in simple black training clothes. As he walked toward the throne room, flanked by guards, he could hear the murmur of many voices. The entire court had gathered to witness his presentation, and quite possibly his humiliation. But Do-yun remained calm. He had spent years preparing for this mission, studying not just starborn culture and combat, but their psychology. The massive doors swung open, revealing the royal throne room in all its crystal glory. And there, seated on a throne that seemed carved from living starlight, was Queen Hyarin herself. Do-yun's first thought was that the Holovids hadn't done her justice. She radiated power and authority, her silver skin almost glowing in the morning light that streamed through the crystal walls. Her eyes, when they met his, held ancient wisdom and fierce intelligence. The moment of truth had arrived. Everything Earth hoped to achieve with the Starborn Empire would depend on what happened in the next few minutes. As Do-yun walked forward to meet his destiny, he remembered his old master's words. True strength lies not in dominating others, but in remaining true to yourself. The throne room fell into absolute silence as Queen Hyarin rose from her crystal throne, her luminescent eyes fixed on Ambassador Do-yun, studying his relaxed stance in his simple black training clothes. The morning light streaming through the crystal walls cast rainbow patterns across the polished floor between them. Ambassador, her voice carried effortlessly through the vast chamber. Your arrival has sparked much discussion in my court. Some say humans are too weak to be worthy allies. Others speak of your species' remarkable adaptability. Do-yun met her gaze steadily. Words mean little, Your Majesty. Actions speak truth. A murmur rippled through the assembled court at his boldness. Queen Hyarin's lips curved into a slight smile. Indeed they do. Then you will not object to participating in our traditional combat demonstration. I would be honored, Do-yun replied, bowing at precisely the correct angle. General Sora stepped forward. Your Majesty, perhaps one of our junior warriors should. No, Hyarin cut her off. Send forth our champion, Taezo, the same warrior who greeted our guest so warmly yesterday. The crowd parted as Taezo strode forward, his massive frame towering over Do-yun. The warrior's silver skin gleamed with ritual oils, his muscles rippling as he moved into the central combat circle. Try not to break him too quickly, Queen Hyarin instructed Taezo. We should at least make this interesting for our guests. Do-yun removed his outer robe, rolling his shoulders loosely. The size difference between them was almost comical. Taezo stood nearly 3 feet taller and probably weighed 3 times as much. Begin, Hyarin commanded. Taezo lunged forward with lightning speed, his fist aimed at Do-yun's head with enough force to shatter concrete. But the human was no longer there. He had shifted slightly, letting the massive fist pass within inches of his face. Before Taezo could recover, Do-yun struck 3 precise points on the warrior's extended arm. The crowd gasped as Taezo's right arm went completely numb. What trickery is this? The warrior snarled, switching to a left-handed stance. No trickery, Do-yun replied calmly. Just knowledge of nerve clusters and pressure points. Your nervous system isn't so different from ours. Taezo roared in charge, attempting to use his superior weight to simply crush the human. Do-yun moved like water, redirecting the warrior's momentum. In a motion almost too fast to follow, he used Taezo's own charge to flip the massive alien over his shoulder. The impact when Taezo hit the ground shook the entire chamber. Yield, Do-yun suggested quietly, his finger hovering over a point on Tiso's neck. The warrior tried to move but found his body wouldn't respond properly. "I yield," he growled. As Doyan stepped back, the feeling returned to Tiso's limbs. The warrior stood slowly, his expression a mix of confusion and reluctant respect. Queen Hyarin leaned forward on her throne. "Fascinating. You didn't overpower him. You used his own strength against him. In human martial arts, we learned that the strongest opponent can be defeated by their own force," Do-hyun explained. "Water does not fight the mountain. It flows around it, through it, and eventually wears it down." "Pretty words," called out a noble from the crowd. "But surely you don't think such tricks would work against Her Majesty?" The chamber grew deadly quiet. Everyone knew challenging the queen, even indirectly, was forbidden unless formally declared. Do-hyun had not come here to fight the queen. That would be diplomatic suicide. But Queen Hyarin stood, removing her ceremonial cape. For once, Lord Kihan raises an interesting point. "Ambassador, would you honor me with a demonstration of your technique?" This was dangerous territory. A wrong move could shatter the diplomatic mission before it began, but refusing would be seen as weakness. "If your Majesty wishes," Do-hyun said carefully, "I would be privileged to share knowledge in the spirit of cultural exchange." Hyarin's eyes sparkled with interest as she stepped into the combat circle. She moved with predatory grace, her silver skin almost glowing with anticipation. "Cultural exchange," she repeated, dropping into a fighting stance. "I like that. Show me what humans can do, Ambassador." The entire court held its breath as human and starborn queen faced each other. This was unprecedented. No foreign diplomat had ever engaged in combat with a starborn monarch. What followed would be talked about for generations. Queen Hyarin attacked with a combination of speed and power that made her previous challengers look like children. But Do-hyun moved like shadow and mist, never where the strikes were aimed, always just out of reach. When he counterattacked, his movements were precise and economical. He never tried to match her strength, instead using her own power against her. For every blow she landed, he scored a touch on vital points that temporarily numbed or weakened. Their combat became a deadly dance, beautiful and terrifying to watch. The queen's raw power and superior strength against the human's technique and precision. Neither could gain a decisive advantage. After 10 minutes that felt like hours, they reached a stalemate. Hyarin had Do-hyun in a hold that would crush a normal human, but his fingers were positioned over nerve clusters that would paralyze her if pressed. "Well," Queen Hyarin said, actually sounding pleased, "this is refreshingly different." "Indeed, Your Majesty," Do-hyun replied, his voice steady despite the pressure. "Shall we call it a draw?" They separated simultaneously, bowing to each other with genuine respect. The throne room erupted in excited whispers. Never in living memory had anyone fought the queen to a draw, let alone a human. Queen Hyarin raised her voice. "It seems, my lords and ladies, that we have much to learn about our human friends." She turned to Do-hyun. "Ambassador, I believe this cultural exchange you mentioned should continue, perhaps with private lessons." The implications of such an invitation were not lost on anyone present. The queen had never requested private combat training with anyone. Do-hyun bowed. "It would be my honor, Your Majesty, though I suspect I will learn far more than I teach." As the court dispersed, still buzzing with excitement, General Sora approached Do-hyun. "Impressive, Ambassador, but be warned, you've just changed the game entirely. Not everyone will be pleased about this cultural exchange." Do-hyun nodded slightly. He had expected opposition, but the look of genuine interest he'd seen in Queen Hyarin's eyes made it worth the risk. Sometimes the path to peace required dancing on the edge of a blade. The royal training grounds were silent under the light of the twin moons. Queen Hyarin paced the polished floor, her silver skin reflecting the starlight that streamed through the crystal dome above. For the first time in her life, she had requested a private training session with a male. And not just any male. but a human. Ambassador Doyan arrived exactly on time, wearing the same simple black training clothes from their earlier match. He bowed with perfect form as he entered. "Your guard seemed unsure whether to let me pass," he said, a slight smile playing at his lips. "I believe one of them called it highly irregular." "Everything about you is irregular, Ambassador," Hiren replied, stretching her powerful limbs. "That's what makes this interesting. Show me that nerve strike you used earlier." They began slowly, with Doyan demonstrating the precise points where pressure could disrupt the flow of neural signals. Hiren proved to be a quick study, her natural combat instincts adapting to this new knowledge. "Your people have mapped all these points?" she asked, practicing a strike on a training dummy. "Centuries of study," Doyan explained, adjusting her finger position slightly. "We had to learn to overcome stronger opponents, not unlike how your ancestors developed their combat styles." As they trained, their conversation flowed naturally between combat techniques and cultural insights. Hiren found herself fascinated not just by the human's fighting style, but by his way of thinking. "You said earlier that water wears down the mountain," she said during a brief rest. "But surely sometimes direct force is necessary." Doyan considered this. Force has its place, but water can also freeze and shatter rock from within. The key is knowing when to flow and when to freeze. A slow clap interrupted them. Lord Kahan stood at the entrance to the training grounds, his expression cold. "How touching. Our queen, taking lessons from a creature half her size." Hiren's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You forget yourself, Lord Kahan. These grounds are forbidden to all but those I invite personally." "The council is concerned, Your Majesty." Kahan's voice dripped with false respect. "These private sessions with the human ambassador, they go against all protocol." "Protocol serves the throne," Hiren stated firmly, "not the other way around." But even as she spoke, both she and Doyan noticed shadows moving in the upper galleries. More nobles had gathered to watch, their whispers carrying in the perfect acoustics of the training grounds. Doyan moved slowly, positioning himself where he could see both Kahan and the galleries. "Perhaps, Your Majesty, we should demonstrate what cultural exchange truly means." Hiren caught his meaning immediately. Without warning, she attacked, using her full speed and strength. Doyan responded with fluid grace, turning her force aside. They moved together in a combat dance that combined both their styles, her power flowing into his technique, his precision enhancing her strength. The watching nobles fell silent, mesmerized by the display. Even Kahan couldn't hide his surprise as the human and their queen demonstrated something entirely new, a fusion of starborn power and human adaptability. They ended the demonstration with a complex sequence that left them back to back, each guarding the other's blind spots. The message was clear. This was partnership, not submission. "I believe," Hiren addressed the galleries, "that tradition exists to make us stronger. And true strength comes from growth, not stagnation." The nobles began to withdraw, many looking thoughtful. Kahan lingered last, his face unreadable. "Be careful, my queen. Some traditions exist for good reasons." After he left, Doyan turned to Hiren. "He's right about one thing. We're breaking a lot of protocols." "Good," Hiren said firmly. "Some need to be broken." She paused, studying him with those luminescent eyes. "These sessions, they're about more than just combat techniques, aren't they?" "Everything is connected," Doyan replied carefully. "Combat, diplomacy, culture, change." They continued training late into the night, but now there was an underlying tension, an awareness that their private sessions had become very public knowledge. The political implications would soon reach far beyond the training grounds. As Doyan prepared to leave, Hiren stopped him. "Tomorrow night, same time. And Ambassador, bring me more of your human sayings about water and mountains. They make me think." He bowed, hiding a smile. "As you wish, Your Majesty." Walking back to his quarters, Doyan noticed more guards than usual along the corridors. Whether they were there to protect him or wash him, he couldn't tell. But one thing was certain: the game had changed. Their training sessions had become a symbol of something larger, the possibility of change in a society that had remained unchanged for centuries. In her private chambers, Queen Hyren stood at her window, watching the human ambassador cross the courtyard below. For the first time since taking the throne, she felt truly challenged, not just physically, but mentally and culturally. It was a dangerous feeling, but an exhilarating one. She touched the spots on her arm where his nerve strikes had landed. Already her warriors were asking to learn these techniques. Seeds of change had been planted. The only question was what would grow from them, and who would try to pull them up by the roots. The grand ceremonial hall buzzed with tension as nobles gathered for the annual Star Festival. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across the gathered starborn elite, their silver skin shimmering in the artificial starlight. Queen Hyren sat on her ceremonial throne, watching the crowd with sharp eyes while Ambassador Doyan stood among the diplomatic delegation. 3 weeks of private training sessions had changed things. Whispers followed both of them now, some of admiration, others of disapproval. The way they moved showed their shared training, a blend of starborn power and human technique that had begun spreading through the younger warriors. "The queen looks different," one noble whispered to another. "More relaxed. More human." Lord Kihan moved through the crowd like a shadow, stopping to speak quietly with various council members. His face showed proper respect, but his eyes burned with barely hidden anger. As tradition demanded, the festival began with combat demonstrations. Young warriors showed their skills, many now incorporating moves they'd learned from watching the Queen and the human ambassador train. Hyren noted the changes with satisfaction, while Kihan's frown deepened. Then it happened. The lights went out suddenly, plunging the hall into darkness. When they came back on seconds later, armed warriors stood at every exit. But these weren't royal guards. Their armor bore the ancient mark of the purest faction. "Protect the Queen," General Sora shouted, drawing her weapon. But before the loyal guards could react, smoke bombs filled the hall with thick purple mist. Doyan's training kicked in instantly. The smoke had a distinct chemical smell, designed to disorient starborn physiology, but human lungs processed it differently. While others staggered, he moved with purpose through the chaos. "Your Majesty," he called out, spotting Hyren fighting through the effects of the gas. 3 attackers had reached her throne, but even disoriented, she was holding them back. Doyan reached her side just as a massive warrior swung a ceremonial blade at her head. The human's hand struck precise nerve clusters in the attacker's arm, causing the weapon to clatter to the floor. "Behind you," Hyren warned, her voice slightly slurred from the gas. Doyan ducked as she threw a punch over his head, catching another assassin in the chest. They moved together instinctively, backs pressing against each other. Months of training had made them intimately familiar with each other's fighting styles. Where she struck with power, he followed with precision. When attackers tried to overwhelm him with strength, her raw force cleared them away. "The human has corrupted our queen." Kian's voice boomed through the hall. "The throne must be cleansed. The only corruption here is your treason." Hyren called back, her voice growing stronger as the gas began to dissipate. "Stand down." Instead, more warriors pushed forward. Doyan spotted the pattern in their attack. They were trying to separate him from the Queen. He countered with a series of quick strikes, targeting nerve points through their armor. "Your Majesty," he said between breaths, "they're herding us toward the eastern door." "There's a reason for that," she replied, understanding immediately. "The sacred chamber lies that way. If they can force us in there, only pure starborn blood is allowed inside," Doyan finished. "They'll trap you and kill me." A group of loyal guards led by General Sora fought their way closer, but there were too many traitors between them and the Queen. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. "Any ideas?" Hyren asked, deflecting another attack. "Just one," Doyan replied. "But you're not going to like it." Before she could respond, he grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the western wall, directly opposite from where the attackers wanted them to go. Understanding flashed in her eyes as she saw his target, the great crystal window overlooking the city. "You're right," she said, knocking aside two more attackers. "I don't like it." But she moved with him, their steps perfectly synchronized. The attackers realized their plan too late. As blade strikes rained down around them, Hiren and Do-yun reached the window. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she replied with a grim smile. "Do it anyway." They crashed through the crystal together, shards sparkling around them like stars. The drop was significant, 15 stories down to the palace gardens. But Do-yun had studied starborn architecture well. He knew about the ceremonial force field that protected the palace's outer walls. They hit the energy barrier hard, but it slowed their fall enough for a controlled landing. Hiren rolled to her feet immediately, pulling Do-yun up beside her. "The barracks are 2 minutes away," she said, already moving. "If we can reach my loyal warriors." Shouts from above interrupted her. Kihan's forces were rappelling down the palace walls after them. "I count 12, Do-yun said calmly. "Too many to fight here in the open." "Then we don't fight them here." Hiren grabbed his hand and pulled him toward a small door hidden in the garden wall. "The old tunnels. My ancestors built them for exactly this kind of situation." They ducked inside just as energy bolts began scorching the ground where they'd stood. The tunnel was dark and narrow, barely tall enough for Hiren to stand upright. "This leads to the warrior's sanctuary," she explained as they ran. "Only the royal family knows these paths. We'll gather my loyal forces and take back the palace. And Kihan. We'll learn why challenging a queen who knows both starborn and human combat was a very poor decision." They emerged into a larger chamber where several secret passages converge. The sounds of pursuit echoed behind them. "Your Majesty," Do-yun said quietly, "when this is over, things will have to change." She turned to look at him, her luminescent eyes bright in the darkness. "Things already have changed. That's what Kihan doesn't understand. The old ways aren't enough anymore." More footsteps approached from multiple tunnels. Hiren and Do-yun moved back to back again, ready to face whatever came. The uprising had begun, but it would not end the way the traditionalists planned. Change was coming to the Starborn Empire, written in the shared combat dance of a queen and a human diplomat who dared to break protocol. The warrior's sanctuary blazed with light as Queen Hiren and Ambassador Do-yun burst through the ancient doors. Hundreds of loyal warriors stood ready, their silver skin gleaming with battle oils, weapons drawn. General Sora stepped forward, saluting her queen. "Your Majesty, we received your emergency signal. The palace is secured. Lord Kihan and his conspirators are cornered in the sacred chamber." "Casualties?" Hiren asked, checking her armor for damage. "Minimal." The humans' nerve strike techniques proved invaluable. Most of the fighting ended with temporary paralysis rather than death. Do-yun stood slightly apart, aware of the warrior's gazes. His black training clothes were torn, showing several cuts that leaked red blood, so different from the silver ichor of the Starborn. "The council has convened an emergency session," Sora continued. "They await your presence and judgment." The great council chamber was packed when they arrived. The elders sat in their traditional seats, while captured rebels knelt under heavy guard. Lord Kihan stood in the center, proud even in chains. "You dare bring a human into these sacred proceedings?" He spat as Do-yun entered behind the queen. "The human helped save our empire from your treachery." Elder Mira spoke sharply. "He has earned his place here." Hiren took her throne, her expression stern. "Lord Kihan, you are charged with high treason against the crown. Your actions endangered not just me, but hundreds of innocent lives. I acted to preserve our ways." Kihan's voice rang out. "Our warriors now train in human techniques. Our youth question ancient traditions. And you," he glared at his queen, You spend your nights training with a male barely half your size, breaking every protocol of our ancestors. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Everyone knew about the private training sessions, but no one had dared speak of them so openly. Is that what this is truly about? Hiren asked quietly. Not tradition, but your wounded pride. You must choose, Kian demanded. Be our queen as tradition demands, or forfeit the throne. Silence fell. Even the guards tensed, knowing they witnessed a historic moment. Hiren stood slowly, her height impressive even among her people. You speak of tradition. Let me tell you what tradition truly means. She began walking down the steps from her throne. Our ancestors didn't build this empire by refusing to change. They conquered the stars because they were willing to adapt, to learn, to grow stronger by embracing new ways. She stopped before Kian. You say I must choose. I already have. I choose both our heritage and our future. I choose to honor our strength by making it greater, not by keeping it locked in the past. Pretty words, Kian sneered. But the law is clear. A queen's mate must be her equal in combat. No human could ever. I fought the ambassador to a draw. Hiren cut him off. In front of the entire court. Or have you forgotten? Tricks and deception. Strategy and skill, she corrected. The same qualities our greatest queens used to build this empire. She turned to address the whole chamber. Yes, I have trained with Ambassador Doyan. Yes, I have learned human combat techniques. And yes, I have begun to see strength differently than before. Doyan watched silently, his face carefully neutral despite the weight of the moment. The law says my mate must be my equal, Hiren continued. But it doesn't specify that equality must come from raw physical power alone. Our ancestors were wise enough to leave room for interpretation. She walked back to her throne. I make my choice now, before all witnesses. I choose to take Ambassador Doyan as my consort, not because he can overpower me, but because together we are stronger than either of us alone. The chamber erupted in shocked whispers. A human consort. It was unprecedented. I object. Kian struggled against his chains. The council cannot allow this. The council, Elder Mira spoke firmly, has watched these past months as human diplomatic techniques brought us new allies, as human combat methods strengthened our warriors, and as human adaptability showed us new possibilities. She stood, her ancient voice carrying authority. The law requires a queen's mate to be her equal. Today we witnessed that equality in action as queen and ambassador fought together to save our empire. One by one, the other elders stood, signaling their agreement. Kian's face twisted in rage. You'll destroy everything we are. No, Hiren replied softly. We'll become more than we were. She turned to Doyan. If you accept. For the first time since entering the chamber, Doyan spoke. I came here as Earth's ambassador, seeking alliance between our peoples. I never expected. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But I've learned that the greatest diplomatic victories often come from being willing to take unexpected paths. He approached the throne and knelt, not in submission but in partnership. I accept, Your Majesty, for the future of both our peoples. Then it is decided, Elder Mira announced. Let it be recorded that on this day, Queen Hiren chose strength through change over weakness through stagnation. The chamber filled with the traditional sounds of approval, a rhythmic tapping of armor that grew into a thunderous celebration. As the sound washed over them, Hiren looked down at her chosen consort with a slight smile. Was that diplomatic enough? Perfect, he replied quietly. Though I suspect the real diplomacy is just beginning. She nodded, knowing he was right. They had changed everything today. The future would bring challenges, but they would face them together. Starborn strength and human adaptability united at last. The twin suns rose over the crystalline spires of Starborn Prime, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. The palace courtyard, usually reserved for combat training, had been transformed into a celebration ground. Crystal arches decorated with bioluminescent flowers stretched toward the sky, while delegates from a dozen worlds mingled with starborn nobles. Queen Hyarin stood before her throne, wearing ceremonial armor that combined traditional starborn designs with subtle Earth influences. At her side, Ambassador, now consort, Do-Yun wore a matching set of armor scaled to his human frame. The metal worked with both starborn and Earth symbols. "This has never been done before," he said quietly, watching the crowds gather. "A joint Earth-starborn bonding ceremony. Most good things start with 'never been done before,'" Hyarin replied, her luminescent eyes sparkling with amusement. The ceremony began with traditional combat demonstrations, but unlike the rigid, power-focused displays of the past, these showcased the new integrated fighting style that had spread through the warrior ranks. Young Starborn moved with fluid grace, combining their natural strength with human techniques. General Sora approached the throne, bowing deeply. "Your Majesty, the warrior schools report that applications have doubled since the integration of human combat methods. Even some of the old guard are requesting training." "And Lord Kahan's supporters?" Do-Yun asked. "Most have seen the wisdom in change," Sora replied. "Those who haven't have at least accepted it. Amazing what a few nerve strikes can teach about humility." The ceremonial horns sounded, signaling the start of the formal bonding ritual. Elder Mira stepped forward, her ancient voice carrying across the courtyard. "Today we witness not just the bonding of two individuals, but the joining of two cultures, two ways of thinking, two forms of strength." Hyarin and Do-Yun moved to the center of the courtyard. As tradition demanded, they would demonstrate their compatibility through combat, but not against each other. Instead, they faced a series of challenges together, showing how their different styles complemented each other perfectly. The crowd watched in amazement as the Queen's raw power flowed seamlessly into her consort's precise techniques. When attackers came at Do-Yun with overwhelming force, Hyarin's strength cleared the way. When they tried to overwhelm her with numbers, his quick nerve strikes created openings. "They move like one being," someone whispered. "Power and precision in perfect balance." The demonstration ended with a move that had never been seen before in Starborn combat, a combination of Hyarin's strength and Do-Yun's technique that left their challengers disabled but unharmed. "The old ways taught us that strength must be proved through dominance," Elder Mira addressed the crowd. "Today we learn that true strength can also be proved through harmony." The bonding ritual continued with elements from both cultures. Earth diplomatic representatives exchanged traditional vows with Starborn Council members. Warriors performed honor guards using integrated combat styles. Even the feast combined Earth and Starborn cuisine, creating new flavors that delighted both species. As the celebration continued, Hyarin and Do-Yun found a quiet moment in the palace gardens. "The Earth delegation seems pleased," he observed, "though I think some of them are still trying to process the idea of their ambassador becoming an alien queen's consort. And my warriors are still adjusting to taking combat lessons from a human." Hyarin laughed. "But they're learning. We all are." They watched as a group of young warriors practiced nearby, a mix of humans and Starborn training together. "This is just the beginning, isn't it?" Do-Yun asked. "Yes," Hyarin replied thoughtfully. "Change never stops with one event. The real work starts now." She was right. Already, plans were being made. Training academies would be established on both Earth and Starborn Prime, teaching integrated combat styles. Diplomatic protocols were being rewritten to incorporate both cultures' strengths. Trade agreements were being negotiated that would benefit both worlds. "Your Majesty," General Sora interrupted their moment. "The Centauri delegation requests your presence. Apparently, they're interested in learning more about this cultural integration." Hyarin smiled. "Tell them we'll be there shortly." As Sora left, the Queen turned to her consort. "Ready to show the galaxy what Earth and Starborn can do together?" "Always," Do-Yun replied, taking her hand. "Though perhaps we should warn them that change can be a bit uncomfortable at first." "They'll learn," Hiren said confidently, "just as we did." They walked back to the celebration together, their steps perfectly matched despite their size difference. Above them, the twin suns of Starborn Prime shone down on a world transformed, not through conquest or domination, but through the willingness to learn from differences and find strength in change. The palace archives would record this day as the beginning of a new era. But for those who witnessed it, the most memorable image was simpler: a human and a starborn queen, moving through life as they had moved in combat. Different but complementary, neither complete without the other. And in the years that followed, when other worlds faced the challenge of change, they would look to Starborn Prime and remember that the greatest strength often comes not from standing alone, but from learning to dance with the unexpected.